Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's mistress who changed France. Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson, better known as Madame de Pompadour, was born on December 29, 1721 in Paris. Her family belonged to the French bourgeoisie, quite wealthy, but still non-aristocratic class. It would seem that she had little chance to get into the inner circle of royalty, but the story of Jeanne is the story of an incredible ascent. Jeanne's father, François Poisson, was involved in financial fraud and was forced to leave France in 1725 because of debts and involvement in shady schemes. His disappearance was a blow to the family, but soon a man appeared who changed her fate, Charles Guillaume Lenormand de Tournem, a wealthy tax collector and rumored to be Jeanne's real father. Charles took over the girl's upbringing, and thanks to his patronage, Jeanne received a brilliant education. She studied first at the Ursuline convent, where she developed an interest in literature, music, and theater, and then with private tutors continued her studies at home. Emphasis was placed on manners, language, etiquette, and the art of small talk, skills vital to a woman dreaming of entering high society. As a child, Jeanne visited the fortune-teller Madame Le Bonne, who said that she would one day become the ruler of the heart of the king. This phrase struck a chord in young Jeanne's soul and, as it turned out later, became prophetic. In 1741, at the age of 20, Jeanne married Charles Guillaume Lenormand d'Étoile, the nephew of her patron. The marriage was a favorable union for both parties. It gave Charles access to her substantial dowry and Jeanne a noble status that allowed her to forget her father's past. Jeanne herself received freedom of movement in the world and an official reason to visit the most prestigious salons in Paris. Although the marriage was formal at first, over time her husband fell in love with Jeanne. They became quite a happy couple, especially after the birth of their daughter Alexandrine in 1744. Jeanne easily charmed those around her. She was called a brilliant conversationalist. She could support a conversation on any topic, from botany and philosophy to fashion and politics. It was in the salons that she began to get acquainted with Enlightenment thinkers. Voltaire, Montesquieu, Duclos, all of them were impressed by her intelligence and reading. Jeanne was able to turn even a boring conversation into an event, gracefully injecting jokes, observations, and paradoxes into the conversation. She was rapidly gaining a reputation not only as a beautiful woman, but also as an intelligent, educated, deep person. These qualities became her weapons in the upcoming game for power. In 1744, Jeanne's family purchased an estate in Étoile, not far from the forest of Sénart, where King Louis XV often hunted. This location was no accident. One day, during a royal hunt, Jeanne accidentally drove in a brightly colored carriage past the hunting cortege, dressed in a blue dress, surrounded by the greenery of the forest. The king noticed her. His attention was caught instantly. Jeanne's image was like a theatrical scene, elaborate to the point of detail. The next day, Jeanne received a gift from the king. Soon after, Madame de Châteauroux, Louis's favorite at the time, died. Jeanne received an invitation to the palace for a masquerade ball. She came as Diana the Huntress, a subtle symbol referring back to their first meeting. At this ball, the king took off his mask and publicly confessed his sympathy. A few weeks later, Jeanne was given an apartment in Versailles, directly above the king's chambers. To officially become a favorite, Jeanne had to break off her marriage. This happened on May 7, 1745. At the same time, the king granted her the title of Marquise de Pompadour, having bought a plot of land especially for this purpose. In September 1745, she was formally presented to the king and court. From that moment on, she became not just a mistress, but a political and cultural player at Versailles. Jeanne immediately established a relationship with Queen Marie Leschinska, swearing loyalty to her. The queen accepted her, unlike her previous favorites. Although her intimate relationship with the king ended around 1750, it did not affect her status. On the contrary, it was enhanced. Louis XV trusted Jeanne more than anyone else. She became his intermediary, secretary, counselor. He entrusted her to conduct correspondence, transmit orders, coordinate appointments. In 1752, she received the highest court title, Duchess and Lady of the Court. This meant that she officially joined the elite of French society. In 1756, the 7 Years' War broke out, during which Jeanne played an active role in diplomacy. She insisted on an alliance with Austria, which later drew a barrage of criticism. Many blamed her for dragging France into a protracted and ruinous conflict. Her influence at court was so great that she became known as the Shadow Prime Minister. Louis XV was characterized by indecision, and his reign was often characterized by the lack of a firm hand. Therefore, Madame de Pompadour was not only given authority, but also the responsibility for failures. Since the mid-1750s, Madame de Pompadour made a turn towards culture. It was thanks to her that France became a recognized center of artistic fashion. She supported painters, sculptors, architects, reformed porcelain manufactories in Sèvres, developed painting, music, and theater. She introduced the Rococo style. Light, refined, pastel, with an abundance of decorative elements. This style became associated with Versailles and France itself in the 18th century. Thanks to her patronage, many artists and masters were able to realize themselves and leave a bright trace in the history of European art. Almost every portrait of Madame de Pompadour is a carefully crafted message. She was depicted carrying books, notes, letters, engraving tools to emphasize her intelligence, taste, and versatility. In one sculpture, she appeared as an allegory of friendship, a message of loyalty to the king even after the end of a love affair. Over the years, her style became more and more restrained. In her last portraits, she chose more austere, motherly images, as if to say, "I am more than a mistress, I am part of history." Jeanne remained by the king's side until her death. Despite illness and fatigue, she continued to participate in court affairs, advising the king, writing letters, and supporting artists and scholars. In 1764, in her 42nd year, she fell ill with tuberculosis. Louis XV was deeply shocked. He personally nursed her back to health, but the disease proved fatal. Jeanne died in April 1764. At her funeral, the king watched the procession from a window. Protocol dictated that he could not attend in person. But he stood silent until the carriage with her body was out of sight, with tears in his eyes. Madame de Pompadour has remained in history as more than just a favorite. She was a woman of intelligence, ambition, and incredible intuition. Her journey from bourgeois girl to one of the most powerful women in France has come to symbolize how personality and talent can transcend origins. She changed the style of France, influencing diplomacy, culture, and the way of life at court. Her image inspired artists, writers, and philosophers, and her name became a household name. Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson, Madame de Pompadour, has forever written her name in the Golden Book of French history, not as a mistress, but as a person who changed the era.